Tonight we travel to the edge of an empire. Not to the marble forums of Rome, not to the sunlit temples or triumphal arches, but to a quieter place. A place of damp earth and timber walls. A place where wind moves steadily across a wide river frontier, and where men stand watch beneath heavy helmets long before sunrise. Imagine the Roman world at its height. Roads stretching across continents. Legions stationed from the deserts of Syria to the cold forests of Germania. An empire that described itself as eternal. But empires are not built from marble alone. They are built from routine, from discipline, from repetition, from the steady, unglamorous endurance of ordinary people. Tonight we will walk slowly through that layered world. We will begin in the mud and timber of a frontier fort along the Rhine. We will trace the patient ambition of a man who reshaped Rome into an empire. We will move through forests where confidence dissolved into silence. We will read letters written by soldiers who missed their socks and their sisters. We will stand at roadside shrines and follow the steady rhythm of supply wagons on stone roads. And at last, we will rest in the quiet elegance of a senator's villa, where the comforts of empire were carefully arranged behind cool marble walls. This is not a story of shouting generals or flashing swords. It is a story of structure, of systems, of endurance. So take a slow breath. Let your thoughts settle. And imagine yourself far from home, standing at the very edge of Rome's vast and disciplined world. You wake before the light. There is no gentle dawn in a Roman frontier fort. The day begins with a sound, perhaps the sharp call of a horn, perhaps the barked order of a centurion moving between barracks. You open your eyes to dimness. The air is cool, slightly damp. The walls around you are timber and packed earth. 8 men share this space, sleeping on narrow cots arranged with military precision. Your body is already tired. Yesterday you drilled for hours. The day before you marched. The day before that, you stood watch along the riverbank, scanning a tree line that rarely moved. You rise because you must. The rhythm of your life is not your own. You are stationed near the Rhine frontier, perhaps in Germania, perhaps in a fort overlooking cold, steady waters that mark Rome's uneasy boundary. Beyond the river lie forests that seem endless. Dark, quiet, and unfamiliar. Rome calls them barbarian lands. But your concern is not grand strategy. It is your feet. Before breakfast, you strap on heavy leather sandals reinforced with iron studs. They are durable, yes, but they are not gentle. Blisters are constant companions. The weight of your armor presses on your shoulders, chain mail or segmented iron plates depending on the period. Beneath it, a wool tunic that traps heat in summer and barely holds warmth in winter. You carry your own world on your back. A legionary's pack is substantial. Tools for digging, cooking equipment, spare clothing, rations. When marching, you may carry up to 30 kilograms or more. The Romans pride themselves on this discipline. You are expected to build your own camp each night, to dig ditches, to raise palisades. Endurance is not optional. It is the foundation of empire. Breakfast is simple. Perhaps a ration of grain that you grind yourself into coarse flour. Perhaps salted pork or bacon when supplies are steady. The bread is dense, the salt sharp. Water or diluted wine washes it down. There is no variety. There is reliability. And then the drills begin. Even when no war threatens, you train as if it does. You practice formations, shield locked to shield, gladius held steady. You thrust at wooden posts as if they were enemies. The wooden practice swords are heavier than the real ones, designed to strengthen your arm. Over and over. The same movements, the same commands, the same dust rising beneath your feet. You are part of a machine. Individual identity fades beneath uniformity. Hair kept short, beards often discouraged, equipment standardized, obedience absolute. The centurion's vine staff is a quiet reminder that discipline can be enforced swiftly. And yet, much of your time is not spent fighting. It is spent waiting, guarding a stretch of river that rarely changes, repairing walls, maintaining roads, escorting supply wagons. You might help construct a bridge or clear forest for better visibility. You might assist engineers in laying stones that will outlast you by centuries. Rome builds even when it is not conquering. Isolation settles slowly. You enlisted perhaps for citizenship, for steady pay, for the promise of land upon discharge. You signed on for 25 years of service. You may never again see the town where you were born. Letters from home arrive rarely. News travels slowly. The seasons mark time more clearly than politics in distant Rome. In winter, the cold is sharp and unrelenting. Frost gathers on wooden palisades. The river edges harden with ice. Breath hangs in the air during morning drills. Your fingers stiffen around shield straps. In summer, insects gather near water. The air grows heavy. Armor chafes against damp skin. There is no comfortable season on the frontier. Even leisure is structured. You may gamble with dice in the barracks. You may visit bathhouses if the fort is well equipped. You may share stories with fellow soldiers, men from Spain, Gaul, Italy, perhaps North Africa, all bound by oath to the same eagle standard. The standard itself is sacred. It represents Rome. And Rome is larger than any one man's discomfort. Yet discomfort is constant. Blistered feet. Achieving the perfect polish on your helmet because inspection is strict. Standing watch in the dark when the forest seems to breathe beyond the firelight. Sometimes there are skirmishes, small clashes, raids repelled, arrows loosed from tree limbs. The aftermath is not glorious. It is quiet. Bodies carried away. Repairs made. Drills resumed the next day. The frontier is less a place of heroic battle and more a place of tension that never entirely disappears. You must remain alert, even when nothing happens. Especially when nothing happens. And perhaps that is what would challenge you most. The monotony, the predictability, the surrender of personal rhythm to military time. You do not wake when you choose. You eat when ordered. You march when commanded. You build because it is required. Your identity is defined by rank, unit, and oath. There is pride in it. But pride does not lighten your pack. It does not soften the ground beneath your cot. It does not shorten the years. And yet, through this repetition, this constant drilling, digging, guarding, Rome holds its borders. The empire's marble monuments depend on mud-soaked boots. Senators debate policy because legionaries stand watch in distant provinces. From the quiet fort along the Rhine, Rome stretches outward. And you, standing in damp leather sandals at dawn, are one small but essential part of that vast and disciplined design. The horn sounds again. Another drill begins. Another day that feels like the one before. And you realize that surviving here is not about a single heroic act. It is about enduring the ordinary. The wait, the cold, the waiting. And that is why, perhaps, you would not last a day. From the damp frontier of the Rhine, where discipline holds back uncertainty, we now move south, toward Rome itself. Toward marble steps, crowded forums, and the careful, patient rise of a man who understood that power, like empire, is built slowly. His name at birth was Gaius Octavius. History remembers him as Augustus. Imagine him not as a towering statue in white marble, but as a frail, thoughtful young man navigating a world already shaped by violence. He was not born into unquestioned dominance. His health was often delicate. His voice was said to be unremarkable. He did not inspire armies through sheer physical presence. What he possessed instead was patience, and an instinct for survival. When Julius Caesar was assassinated in 44 BCE, Rome did not immediately transform into an empire. It fractured. The Senate trembled. Armies shifted loyalties. Powerful men calculated their next moves. And in the midst of this instability, a teenager stepped forward. Octavian had been named in Caesar's will as his adopted son and heir. It was a bold claim. Dangerous even. Caesar's name was both shield and target. Many dismissed him. He did not yet command legions. He did not possess the seasoned authority of generals like Mark Antony. But he understood something essential. In Rome, power was as much perception as force. He moved carefully. He aligned with Mark Antony and Lepidus to form the Second Triumvirate, an uneasy alliance. Rome was divided among them, its territories portioned out like pieces on a board. There were proscriptions, lists of enemies declared outside the law, confiscations of property, political rivals removed from the stage. These were grim measures and they reshaped Rome's leadership class. Yet Octavian did not rely solely on fear. He cultivated loyalty among soldiers. He paid attention to veterans. He promised stability in a city weary of civil war. He crafted an image of piety and duty, aligning himself with traditional Roman virtues. While Antony grew increasingly associated with Cleopatra in Egypt, a relationship that Roman propaganda would frame as exotic and destabilizing, Octavian positioned himself as Rome's defender. The conflict between them culminated at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE. It was a naval confrontation, but its significance was broader than tactics at sea. When Antony and Cleopatra were defeated, Rome's last great civil war quietly closed. Octavian returned to Rome not as a dictator, but as something more subtle. He understood the dangers of appearing too powerful. So in 27 BCE, he performed an act of theatrical humility. He returned authority to the Senate and people of Rome. In response, they granted him the title Augustus, meaning revered or majestic. The republic in name remained. In structure it had changed. Augustus did not dismantle Rome's institutions, he reshaped them. He reduced the size of the Senate while increasing its prestige. He established a standing army loyal to the state rather than individual generals. He reformed taxation. He stabilized currency. He understood that legions on distant frontiers required regular pay, that roads must be maintained, that grain must flow into Rome reliably. He reorganized provinces, distinguishing between those governed directly by the Senate and those under imperial authority, often the provinces where legions were stationed. It was a quiet consolidation. No sudden declarations of kingship. No crown placed upon his head. Instead, titles accumulated: princeps, meaning first citizen; imperator, recognizing military authority; pontifex maximus, chief priest. Power layered carefully, like stones in a Roman road. Augustus also shaped Rome's moral landscape. He passed laws encouraging marriage and childbirth among the elite. He promoted traditional family values. He sponsored temples and restored religious rites. He presented himself as restorer rather than innovator. Under his rule, Rome experienced relative stability, what later generations would call the Pax Romana. Trade expanded. Infrastructure flourished. Monumental building projects transformed the city. Augustus famously claimed that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. But beneath that marble lay discipline. Legions stationed along rivers and deserts. Tax systems calibrated carefully. Political messaging crafted with precision. Augustus understood that empire depends not only on conquest but on administration. And yet, his position was never entirely without tension. Succession loomed as a persistent concern. He had no surviving biological sons. He adopted heirs, watched some die prematurely, recalibrated plans. The stability he created required continuity, and continuity required careful planning. He learned to balance authority with restraint. He allowed the Senate to debate. He avoided overt displays of monarchy. He appeared accessible, modest in dress, measured in speech. But the reality remained clear. Rome's fate now flowed through one man's office. The frontier legionary you imagined earlier, drilling in damp leather sandals, served not the Senate alone but the system Augustus crafted. A centralized command. A professional army. A bureaucracy capable of sustaining distant garrisons. Augustus did not rely solely on dramatic gestures. He relied on structure. And structure endures longer than spectacle. By the time of his death in 14 CE, the transformation was complete. Rome was an empire even if it still called itself a republic. The machinery that sustained those frontier forts, the pay chest, the supply wagons, the chain of command, bore his imprint. From a frail teenager navigating political chaos to the architect of imperial order, Augustus' rise was not loud. It was methodical, measured, relentless. And as we leave the quiet marble halls of Rome and return to the distant forests of Germania, we begin to understand how confidence in structure can sometimes lead to overconfidence in terrain. Because even the most disciplined empire can falter when it misunderstands the land beyond its roads. And in the shadowed forests of northern Europe, Rome would soon face a lesson it never fully forgot. Now we move north again. Back beyond the marble temples and orderly streets. Back to damp air, towering trees, and narrow woodland paths where Roman roads had not yet fully imposed their straight lines upon the landscape. It is the year 9 CE. The Roman Empire, under Augustus, appears steady. Provinces are organized. Legions are stationed. Governors oversee distant territories. One such governor is Publius Quinctilius Varus. He is not inexperienced. He has governed Syria. He understands taxation, administration, and order. Germania, newly absorbed into Rome's expanding influence, appears manageable, at least on the surface. Roman forts dot the Rhine frontier. Auxiliary troops patrol. Tribal leaders offer gestures of loyalty. Among them is Arminius, a Germanic noble who has served in the Roman army and earned Roman citizenship. To Varus, Germania seems quiet. Perhaps too quiet. Imagine yourself marching in a long column beneath a sky thick with low gray clouds. The air smells of wet leaves and soil. The path beneath your sandals is uneven, softened by rain. You carry your shield, your pack, your tools, the familiar weight pressing against your shoulders. The legion moves not in battle formation but in stretched-out marching order. There are soldiers, camp followers, supply wagons, animals. It is not a battlefield atmosphere. It is routine. Varus has been informed of a minor disturbance among tribes further east. He decides to move inland to address it, bringing 3 legions, 17, 18, and 19, along with auxiliary units. But the information is false. Arminius, trusted intermediary, has been quietly building a coalition of tribes. He understands Roman discipline. He understands their marching patterns. He knows how they think. The forest, however, belongs to those who grew up within it. As the column pushes deeper into the Teutoburg forest, rain begins to fall more heavily. The ground grows slippery. Wagons struggle in the mud. The line stretches thin. There is no dramatic trumpet blast announcing what happens next. Instead, small disruptions. A sudden shout from the tree line. A thrown spear. Movement between trunks. The forest absorbs sound strangely. You hear more than you see. A shield is raised instinctively. Orders are shouted, but they echo unevenly. The Roman formation struggles to coalesce. The terrain is narrow. The trees crowd in. Standard battlefield tactics, tight formations, coordinated advances, become difficult. And the rain does not stop. Over several days, the situation deteriorates. The legion attempts to build defensive camps at night, but the ground is uneven and morale begins to fray. Supplies grow scattered. Communication falters. The Germanic coalition does not engage in open, sustained battle. Instead, they strike, withdraw, harass. They exploit the environment, a place where Roman discipline cannot fully unfold. It is not a single catastrophic moment. It is an unraveling. Varus reportedly realizes the gravity of the situation too late. Facing the collapse of his command, he chooses not to be captured. The legions, once symbols of unstoppable order, are overwhelmed. When news reaches Augustus in Rome, he is said to have been deeply shaken. Ancient sources describe him exclaiming, "Varus, give me back my legions." Whether the exact words are preserved accurately or not, the emotional weight is clear. 3 legions vanish. Their numbers are never reused. The loss is not merely tactical. It is psychological. For Rome, Germania had seemed poised for quiet integration. Instead, it becomes a boundary. The Rhine hardens into a frontier rather than a corridor of expansion. Subsequent emperors launch punitive campaigns. Germanicus, in particular, attempts to restore honor through further military action. Some battlefield sites are revisited. Remains are buried properly. Standards are recovered. But the strategic vision shifts. Rome ceases its deep push into Germania. The forest remains outside the empire's firm grasp. Imagine walking through that woodland years later. The trees would have grown again. Leaves would cover disturbed soil. Nature would fold gently over what had occurred. Archaeological discoveries centuries later, scattered weapons, armor fragments, coins, confirmed the long struggle. The ground held its memory quietly. The Varian disaster becomes a cautionary tale. It reveals that even the most organized system can falter when it misunderstands terrain, culture, and loyalty. For the legionary on the frontier, the event lingers as a warning. Training intensifies. Fortifications strengthen. Patrols grow cautious. The frontier becomes not merely a line of defense, but a psychological boundary between Roman order and what they perceived as uncertainty beyond. And yet life continues. Drills resume. Rations are distributed. Letters are written home. Empire does not collapse from a single defeat. It adjusts. From the silent trees of Teutoburg, we now shift our gaze westward, to a quieter frontier in Britain, where fragments of daily life have survived not in legend but in ink. There, beneath the soil of a remote fort called Vindolanda, ordinary voices waited nearly 2,000 years to be heard. Let us leave the dense forests of Germania and travel instead to the mist-softened hills of northern Britain. Here, near what would later become Hadrian's Wall, stood a fort called Vindolanda. Today, it appears as layered stone foundations and reconstructed timber walls, resting quietly beneath an open sky. But nearly 2,000 years ago, it was alive with the steady rhythm of frontier life, boots striking packed earth, smoke rising from hearths, the murmur of Latin spoken with many accents. Imagine yourself posted here. The wind carries a damp chill even in summer. Rain arrives without much warning. The surrounding land is green and uneven, stretching toward distant hills that blur beneath low clouds. This is not Rome. This is the edge. Vindolanda predates the construction of Hadrian's Wall, serving as an auxiliary fort along the Stanigate Road, one of the vital arteries connecting Roman outposts. Troops stationed here were not elite legionaries from Italy, but auxiliary units recruited from across the empire, Batavians from the Rhine region, Tungrians from what is now Belgium. Men far from home. In the anaerobic, oxygen-poor soil of Vindolanda, something remarkable survived. Thin wooden tablets, no thicker than a postcard, written in ink. For centuries they lay buried in damp earth, protected by the very mud that once made daily life uncomfortable. When archaeologists uncovered them in the late 20th century, they revealed something rare: ordinary voices from the frontier. Not grand proclamations, not official decrees carved in stone, but letters, shopping lists, invitations, complaints. Imagine holding one of these tablets. The handwriting is small and hurried, the Latin informal, the ink faded but legible. One of the most famous tablets contains a birthday invitation from Claudia Severa to her friend Sulpicia Lepidina, wife of the fort's commander. It is polite, warm, almost intimate. She invites her sister to celebrate with her. Even at the edge of empire, there were birthday parties. Another tablet requests more socks and underpants. The soldier writes home asking for warmer clothing. It is such a small detail, but it shifts the image of Roman military life. Beneath armor and discipline were men who felt cold, who needed comfort, who missed familiar textures against their skin. One tablet complains of poor beer. Another records grain deliveries. Another lists the number of boots required. Imagine yourself standing in the barracks, reading such a message aloud by lamplight. The flicker of flame against timber beams. The faint scent of leather and damp wool. Outside, the wind presses against the fort's wooden palisade. Life here was structured. Morning drills. Guard rotations. Maintenance of roads and walls. Inspections by commanding officers. But between these duties were moments of ordinary humanity. Letters from home carried news of marriages, harvests, illnesses. Supplies arrived slowly and sometimes inadequately. There were frustrations. There were friendships. Women and children also lived at Vindolanda, despite the official prohibition against soldiers marrying during service, a rule often quietly ignored in practice. Families formed. Children grew up hearing Latin mixed with local Brittonic languages. The tablets reveal the texture of frontier life in a way no triumphal arch ever could. One senses boredom as much as tension. The frontier was not always a place of constant battle. More often, it was monotony punctuated by alertness. Weeks might pass in routine maintenance. Then a patrol might report movement beyond the line. But the tablets rarely dwell on combat. They dwell on supplies, on social gatherings, on requests for assistance. It is history at its most intimate, and perhaps most soothing, because it reminds us that empire, for most participants, was lived in small increments. A cup of beer, a repaired sandal, a letter folded carefully and sealed. Archaeologists continue to uncover layers at Vindolanda. Each stratum reveals earlier timber forts beneath later stone structures. The site evolved over decades, reflecting the shifting strategies of Rome's northern frontier. Nearby, Hadrian's Wall would later formalize the boundary, a physical assertion of separation between Roman order and lands beyond. Yet even that wall was not an absolute barrier. Gates allowed trade and controlled movement. Diplomacy and negotiation continued. The Vindolanda tablets survive today as some of the earliest examples of handwritten documents in Britain. They are fragile. Yet their survival feels almost deliberate, as though the damp earth wished to preserve the quiet details of daily life. As you imagine yourself at that remote fort, you might notice how similar certain rhythms feel. Writing home, requesting supplies, sharing invitations. 2,000 years separate us, yet the concerns echo softly. Clothing, friendship, routine. The frontier was not only a place of defense, it was a place of living. From these preserved whispers of everyday life, we now turn inward again, to the spiritual dimension of the Roman frontier. For soldiers and settlers did not carry only weapons and letters with them. They carried gods, small altars, rituals, and quiet prayers offered beneath unfamiliar skies. As evening settles over the fort, the sky fades from pale gray to deep blue. A small oil lamp flickers against the wall of a barracks room. Shadows stretch and soften. The air cools. And in that quiet hour, faith becomes visible. Out on the Roman frontier, religion was not distant or abstract. It was woven gently into daily routine, as steady as marching drills, as ordinary as sharpening a blade. Imagine yourself standing before a small wooden altar. It is simple. A carved niche in a wall. A shallow dish for offerings. Perhaps a small bronze figurine, Jupiter, Mars, or a local deity whose name is unfamiliar in Rome but deeply rooted in this land. You light a small flame. You whisper a short prayer. Not dramatic, not loud, just a quiet request for protection. Roman religion was practical. It was transactional. One offered respect, sacrifice, and ritual precision in exchange for stability, safe travel, victory, health. On the frontier, this practice adapted. Soldiers stationed along the Rhine, Danube, or in Britain encountered local belief systems. Instead of suppressing them outright, Rome often absorbed them. A Celtic river spirit might be equated with a Roman god. A local war deity might be honored alongside Mars. This blending created a layered spiritual landscape. Imagine walking through the fort courtyard. You pass small stone altars dedicated to Jupiter Optimus Maximus. A few steps farther, another altar inscribed with a hybrid name, a fusion of Roman and indigenous tradition. The empire expanded not only through roads and forts, but through accommodation. One of the most intriguing cults practiced among soldiers was the cult of Mithras. This mystery religion, likely originating in the eastern provinces, gained popularity among military communities. Worship took place in underground chambers called Mithria, long, narrow spaces designed to resemble caves. Inside, initiates participated in structured rituals. Symbolism was dense. A carved relief often depicted Mithras slaying a sacred bull, a scene rich with cosmic meaning, though its precise interpretation remains debated. The atmosphere inside a Mithrium would have been hushed. Low ceiling, candlelight, the scent of oil and perhaps incense. Only initiates allowed. Imagine yourself seated on a bench along the wall, listening to recited passages whose meanings unfold slowly. The ritual reinforces loyalty, not just to the god but to the community. On the frontier, such bonds mattered. Religion also served a political function. The imperial cult, worship of the emperor as a semi-divine figure, reinforced loyalty to Rome. Altars dedicated to the emperor's genius, his guiding spirit, appeared even in remote outposts. Participation was less about personal devotion and more about unity. You light incense before the emperor's image. You acknowledge the distant center of power. You reaffirm your place within the vast system. Yet alongside official cults were small domestic rituals. In barracks rooms and family quarters, soldiers and their companions maintained household shrines, lararia, dedicated to protective spirits known as laras and penates. A simple shelf, a few figurines, a daily offering of bread or wine. Imagine performing this ritual before stepping out into the cold morning air. It is small, repetitive, familiar. Even far from Rome, ritual created continuity. Local communities beyond the fort maintained their own sacred groves, river offerings, and seasonal festivals. Roman soldiers sometimes observed these practices, sometimes participated. On a hill overlooking the fort, perhaps there stands a shrine to a local deity of the land. Over time, an inscription appears, Latin letters honoring that same deity under a Romanized name. Religion on the frontier was not a clash so much as a layering. Different beliefs resting gently upon one another. And always ritual was steady, predictable, comforting. When illness swept through a unit, prayers were offered. When a patrol departed, incense was burned. When a soldier completed his term of service, a vow made years earlier might finally be fulfilled, an offering placed carefully upon an altar in gratitude. Imagine the quiet after such a vow is completed. The wind moves softly across the parade ground. The fort sleeps. Faith here is less about grand temples and more about persistence. A small flame in a damp land. A whispered prayer before sleep. As the centuries passed, religious landscapes shifted. Christianity would eventually move through the empire, altering ritual patterns and belief systems. But in the early imperial frontier, diversity defined spiritual life. Soldiers carried gods across rivers and mountains, and in doing so they carried familiarity. From the spiritual life of the frontier, we now turn to the practical mechanisms that made such distant posts possible at all. The immense logistical web that fed, clothed, and supplied Rome's legions. For empire was not sustained by faith alone. It was sustained by roads, by grain, by careful accounting. Let us move slowly and steadily into the machinery behind the march. If you stand once more on the edge of the Roman frontier, perhaps along the Rhine where mist rises gently from the water at dawn, you might notice something remarkable. Despite the distance from Rome, despite forests, rivers, mountains, everything here feels organized, measured, sustained. That is because the Roman legion did not exist alone in the wilderness. It was supported by an intricate web of supply lines, engineering, and administration so steady that it often fades into the background. And yet, without it, nothing would function. Imagine yourself again as a legionary. Your armor is heavy, your shield broad, your boots worn from drill. But none of it appears by magic. Every sandal, every helmet, every grain ration has traveled. And the journey of those objects begins long before you lift them. The Roman road system was one of the empire's greatest achievements. These roads were not wandering paths. They were engineered corridors, layered with stone, cambered for drainage, built to endure weather and weight. When you march along one, your footsteps strike solid ground. The rhythm is steady, predictable. The road connects your remote fort to larger settlements, to supply depots, to ports, to Rome. Picture a line of ox-drawn carts moving slowly along such a road. Their wooden wheels creak gently. Inside, sacks of grain, amphorae of olive oil, bundles of spare javelins, replacement sandals. The movement is not hurried. It is constant. Grain was the foundation of the legion's diet. Wheat shipments arrived in bulk, often transported by river or sea where possible, then carried inland. Each soldier received a standard ration. He ground it himself using a small hand mill. The flour became coarse bread or porridge. Imagine the repetitive motion of grinding grain in the evening light. Stone against stone. A soft, circular rhythm. The empire ran on such repetition. Meat was less frequent. Salted pork, occasionally beef. Salt preserved what distance would otherwise spoil. Supplies had to endure long travel, and so preservation was essential. Salt itself was valuable enough to become a symbol of pay. The word salary echoes this ancient importance. Beyond food, there was equipment. Roman military gear was famously standardized. Helmets followed recognizable forms. Shields bore unit insignia. Spears and swords were crafted according to regulation. This standardization allowed replacement parts to move efficiently through the system. If your sandal strap snapped, a shipment of new sandals was already somewhere along the road network. Blacksmiths attached to forts repaired weapons. Artisans maintained armor. Carpenters rebuilt sections of palisade or watchtower. The legion was both a fighting force and a construction crew. Imagine yourself digging a trench not in battle, but to improve drainage around the fort, or repairing a road damaged by frost. Soldiers built the very infrastructure that sustained them. Engineering was part of discipline. Bridges arched over rivers. Culverts carried water beneath roadbeds. Milestones marked distance precisely, reminders that every journey was measured. And measurement was power. Supply depots known as horia stored grain in raised buildings to keep it dry. Warehouses were organized carefully. Inventory recorded. You might walk past tall stacks of sacks, labeled and counted. A quiet clerk scratches notes into wax tablets. Nothing dramatic, just careful accounting. Even water systems were considered. In some forts, aqueducts carried fresh water. In others, wells were dug deep into the earth. Clean water meant fewer illnesses. Fewer illnesses meant stronger units. The frontier may have felt remote, but it was never isolated from Roman organization. Trade also supplemented official supply. Local merchants followed the legions. Where soldiers gathered, markets emerged. Traders offered fresh produce, small luxuries, clothing, even writing materials. Coins exchanged hands. Roman currency flowed outward, tying frontier economies into the imperial system. And so, the legionaries' daily bread might come partly from Italy, partly from nearby farms, partly from river trade. A web of connections. Invisible threads stretching across provinces. Imagine the empire at night. Across thousands of miles, torches flicker in forts, towns, villas. Roads lie silent under starlight, waiting for the next caravan. Everything connected. Everything in motion. And yet, for the individual soldier, this vast machinery felt simple. Food arrived. Equipment was repaired. Orders were delivered. The system worked quietly so that discipline could remain the focus. From this network of roads and supply, we now move into the structure of society itself, into the layered hierarchy that defined who commanded, who obeyed, and who belonged. For Rome was not only roads and rations. It was rank, status, citizenship. Let us turn now to the social order that shaped every interaction within the empire. As the sun lowers over the frontier fort, casting long shadows across the parade ground, it becomes clear that Rome is not merely a collection of roads and soldiers. It is a structure, a layered order, a carefully arranged hierarchy in which every person knows their place, or is constantly reminded of it. Imagine yourself once more as a legionary. You stand in formation, your armor polished, your shield aligned with the others. Around you are men from many provinces, Italy, Gaul, Hispania, perhaps even distant Syria. Yet not all of you hold the same status. At the heart of Roman society lies the concept of citizenship. To be a Roman citizen was to belong to something vast and powerful. It granted legal protections, the right to marry under Roman law, the right to engage in contracts, and, in certain eras, the right to vote. But citizenship was not evenly distributed. If you are a full legionary during much of the empire's early period, you are already a citizen. That status distinguishes you from the auxiliaries, non-citizen troops recruited from conquered territories. The auxiliaries serve alongside you. They fight bravely. They patrol the same cold borders. But they do not hold the same rights, at least not initially. Only after long years of service might an auxiliary soldier earn citizenship for himself and sometimes his family. Imagine the quiet pride of receiving that certificate after decades of duty. A small tablet confirming that you now belong fully to Rome. Belonging was not abstract. It shaped daily life. Above you stands the centurion. His authority is immediate and visible. He enforces discipline. He commands drills. His vine staff is a symbol of rank. Above him, tribunes and legates, men often drawn from wealthier families. Their accents refined, their tunics edged with broader stripes of purple. And far beyond the frontier in Rome itself, senators debate policies that determine your fate. Rank is visible in clothing. A senator's toga carries a wide purple stripe. An equestrian stripe is narrower. Even footwear could signal status. Imagine walking through a provincial town on leave. You recognize a magistrate by the trim of his garment before he speaks. Hierarchy shapes space as well. Within a fort, the commander's quarters are larger, more comfortably appointed. Better furniture. Private rooms. You sleep in a shared barracks room. 8 men to a contubernium. A small hearth. Simple storage. This arrangement is not accidental. It reflects the Roman belief in order. Beyond the military, the hierarchy continues. At the top, the emperor and senatorial elite. Below them, equestrians, wealthy businessmen, administrators, officers. Below them, ordinary citizens, merchants, artisans, farmers. Below them still, freedmen, once enslaved, now legally free but socially marked by their past. And at the bottom, slaves. Slavery in Rome was widespread. Enslaved individuals worked in households, mines, farms, workshops. Some were treated with a measure of familiarity. Others endured harsh conditions, particularly in mines and large estates. The system was normalized. It was part of the economic fabric. And yet, Rome also allowed for limited mobility. A freedman could accumulate wealth. His children might rise higher still. This possibility, however rare, created a dynamic society. Citizenship itself evolved. Over time, emperors extended it more broadly. In the early 3rd century, Emperor Caracalla granted citizenship to nearly all free inhabitants of the empire. A remarkable shift. Imagine the quiet transformation of identity, millions suddenly redefined as Romans. But identity was not only legal, it was cultural. Language marked belonging. Latin in the West, Greek in the East. Participation in Roman rituals. Service in the army. Even burial customs reflected status. Monumental tombs lined roads near cities, announcing wealth and lineage. Meanwhile, humbler graves lay unmarked. As a frontier legionary, you occupy a peculiar space in this hierarchy. You are respected for your service. You are bound by strict discipline. You may one day receive land upon retirement, a modest reward for decades of endurance. But you remain subject to orders from men you will never meet. The empire functions because each layer holds. Authority flows downward. Obedience flows upward. And in this structure, stability is maintained. Now, as the evening deepens and the fort grows quiet, imagine the contrast waiting far from this wind-swept border. In the heart of Italy, in the countryside beyond Rome, where senators retreat from politics to their villas, where marble floors replace packed earth, where perfumed gardens soften the air. From barracks to atrium, from iron discipline to cultivated leisure, let us move gently now into the final thematic segment, into the world of privilege that your endurance helps sustain. Now let the cold wind of the frontier fall away. The damp barracks fade. The rhythmic clang of armor grows distant. In its place, imagine warmth. Soft Mediterranean light spilling across white stone walls. The gentle hum of cicadas in olive groves. The faint splash of water in a courtyard fountain. You are no longer standing watch along the Rhine. You are approaching a Roman senator's villa. From the outside, it appears measured and balanced. Columns evenly spaced, roof tiles warm beneath the sun, carefully tended gardens framing the entrance. Gravel crunches softly beneath sandaled feet as guests arrive. Step inside. The atrium opens above you, sunlight pouring through the central opening in the roof. The compluvium, falling into a shallow pool below the impluvium. The water ripples faintly. Marble gleams. The air carries subtle scents. Olive oil, crushed herbs, perhaps faint incense lingering from a morning household ritual. Here, life moves at a different pace. Where you rose before dawn to drill in heavy armor, the senator rises to quiet conversation and correspondence. A slave brings warm water for washing. Another arranges writing tablets and scrolls. Letters await, petitions, reports from estates, invitations to dinners in Rome. The senator's day is structured but not punishing. He may walk through shaded peristyle gardens, bordered by carefully clipped shrubs and flowering plants. Statues of gods and ancestors stand in thoughtful poses among the greenery. The floors beneath your feet are not packed earth but mosaics, tiny colored stones arranged into intricate scenes. Dolphins leaping, geometric patterns, mythological tales. Even the walls tell stories. Frescoes depict pastoral landscapes, distant villas, painted columns creating illusions of depth. A world within a world. Meals here differ greatly from frontier rations. No salted meat eaten hastily between duties. Instead, fresh bread still warm from the oven. Olives cured in brine. Soft cheeses. Fish seasoned with herbs. Wine diluted with water and poured into fine cups. Dining is not merely sustenance. It is performance. Guests recline on couches arranged around a low table. Courses arrive slowly. Conversation drifts from poetry to politics, from provincial matters to philosophical debates. Voices remain measured. Laughter, when it comes, is controlled. Servants move quietly through the room, trained to anticipate needs before they are spoken. Beyond the villa's walls stretch vast agricultural estates. Fields of grain sway under the sun. Vineyards climb gentle slopes. Olive groves cast dappled shade. These lands generate wealth, managed by overseers, worked by tenant farmers and enslaved laborers. The comfort inside the villa rests upon labor outside it, just as the stability of Rome rests upon the discipline of frontier soldiers. In private rooms, the senator studies rhetoric or law. Shelves hold scrolls carefully stored in cylindrical containers. Wax tablets bear notes on speeches or legal matters. Education is prized. Refinement signals status. Children of the household are taught reading, writing, and recitation. Tutors guide them through Homer and Virgil. They learn posture, pronunciation, self-control. Even leisure has structure. Bathing, for example, is an elaborate ritual. Within the villa's bath complex, rooms progress from warm to hot to cool. Steam rises gently. Oils are applied to the skin and scraped away with curved strigils. Conversation continues in the baths, but softly. The villa is not merely a home. It is a statement. Its architecture communicates authority. Its symmetry reflects Roman ideals of order and balance. Its very existence declares that its owner belongs among the governing class. Yet this life too is not entirely free of tension. Political rivalries simmer. Alliances shift. Reputation must be guarded carefully. A misplaced word in the Senate can carry consequences. But these dangers are subtle. They do not involve standing in freezing rain, scanning dark forests for movement. They unfold in marble halls beneath painted ceilings. At night, lamps glow softly in bronze holders. The villa settles into stillness. Slaves extinguish torches one by one. Curtains sway gently in the evening breeze. Far away on the frontier, a legionary adjusts his cloak against the cold. Two worlds, connected. The senator's polished sandals never touched the mud of Germania. Yet without the legionary's endurance, the villa's peace would falter. This contrast is the quiet heart of empire. Discipline and decadence. Mud and marble. Salted rations and seasoned delicacies. And as we let the image of the villa's courtyard fade, the fountain's gentle trickle echoing in the night, we move softly now toward reflection, toward the conclusion of our journey. From the damp barracks near the Rhine to the polished atrium of a senator's villa, we have traveled through two intertwined worlds, one defined by routine, the other by refinement. You have marched beneath heavy armor, felt the ache of blistered feet, stood watch in silent forests where uncertainty lingered beyond the tree-line. You have also walked through mosaic-lined halls, reclined at measured banquets, observed the calm confidence of those who govern from a distance. Neither world exists alone. The comfort of the villa depends on the endurance of the frontier. The authority of the Senate rests upon the discipline of the legion. Rome did not endure for centuries by accident. It endured because of structure. Because of hierarchy. Because countless individuals performed their roles, whether glamorous or monotonous, day after day. And yet, as you lie comfortably now, perhaps beneath warm blankets in a quiet modern room, there is distance between your world and theirs. No dawn trumpet calls you to formation. No centurion inspects your sandals. No distant forest conceals unknown threats beyond a wooden palisade. The Empire of Rome has long since softened into ruins. Stone forts crumble. Villas lie in fragments beneath Mediterranean soil. The great roads remain, but their legions have faded into memory. What remains is the story. The quiet rhythm of lives once lived. The steady machinery of discipline and comfort intertwined. And as the image of marble and mud dissolves gently into darkness, allow your thoughts to drift. Let the structure of empire settle into stillness. Let the wind along the frontier grow faint. Let the fountain in the atrium fall silent. And rest. Sleep now in a world far gentler than theirs.